is simpler to make a player follow the mouse. So when we have x equals to 30 and y equals to 30, we need to change these values to the position of the mouse. And how do we get that position? We simply type mouse underscore x on the x position and mouse underscore y in the y position, and that's all you need. We click now and run the game and wait for the code to compile. And after everything is ready, we should see the player following the mouse. It sticks to the mouse, so it doesn't matter where it is, the player is going to follow it, okay, until it reaches the window. It reaches out of the window, of course. So it looks like this. Okay, this is very, very simple. And notice that this works because the code that we wrote is inside a step event. So this is calculated every frame of the game. Okay, so that's why the player very smoothly follows the mouse position. Right? So a couple of things that we have to understand here as well. We wrote that, but it is interesting to add a comment to our code. So what is a comment? A comment is a line of code that is not processed by the compiler. Okay, it's something that is not going to change in any way how your code behaves. Okay, you can't break the game by making comments, or for example, you can change how quickly a player can move by just doing that. Okay, comments are things that are not processed, but they are one of the most important things that you can make in your code, because comments, they explain whatever you're doing. So for example, you are going to make this game and maybe you stop working on it for a week, and maybe you had an idea, hey, I can improve that collector game that we were making last week, and then you go back and maybe you can forget what you did. This is very common. Okay, this is absolutely common. And also this could happen whenever you're going to work with other people. Okay, you might make a complex logic that is going to be very hard for a fellow programmer or an artist, a game designer to understand whatever is going on. So comments, they save us. Okay, so try to make a practice of making comments. And what we're simply going to do is we're going to make player follow the mouse. Okay, that's all I'm going to write here, and this doesn't change the code in any way. All right, so let's click OK here to save the changes, and you're going to note that this piece of code here contains the title execute a piece of code. So for instance, if I were to drag another piece of code here and then saved it and wrote anything I wanted, this is also going to be called execute a piece of code. So this tends to be very messy when you have 5 or 10 different pieces of code here in the actions panel. So how do we rename that? How do we give this a name? You can simply go to that comment that you added in the first line of the player and add a third slash. Okay, because comments, you write them by typing 2 slashes. When you write a third, that becomes the title of that code block. So if you click now on save changes, you see that it's going to be named make player follow the mouse. That's all you needed. Okay, so let's delete this one here. And of course, if we run the game now, we're going to see the player following the mouse. Now, why did I make the player point to the right? Okay, why did we do this? I want to make something that is interesting here. We want to make the player to rotate as the mouse changes its position. Okay, we want it to smoothly point at the mouse. So how do we do this? Imagine you have a circle around the player here. Okay, and I told you to make the player point to the right because there is a variable that is called direction, which is an arrow that points to the right. Okay, so we have to rotate that direction to make the player points to other positions. So in this circle here, you have 5 different numbers. You have 0 here on the right, you have 90 on the top, you have 180 in the left, you have 270 at the bottom, and you also have 360, which is the same as 0. These are all Euler degrees. Okay, it's a representation of rotation. So you can use all of these 5 numbers, but most commonly we use 0, 90, 180, and 270 to change where the player points. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the position where the player is. And then we're going to get the position of the mouse. Okay, and we're going to make an arrow. We're going to get that direction. Okay, so we need to get the direction where the mouse was and where the mouse is now, and get an arrow that points to that little change here, to whatever happened here. Okay, and before we write that logic, let's go to the create event we're going to drag this execute code here to actions. Let's start by following our practice to make a comment. Let's use 3 slashes here, and we're going to name this initialize variables. Okay, and we're going to declare 2 variables here. Remember, we used x and y. These are variables, they're instance variables provided by GameMaker. So this is something that we don't need to do. But we're going to use something that is not provided by GameMaker. We need to make our own variable. And let's give a nice name to it. We're going to name this previous underscore mouse underscore x. And I'm going to start and assign it to 0. Okay, I'm going to assign the value 0 to a certain position of memory, which we are conveniently calling previous mouse x. We're also going to use previous underscore mouse underscore y equals to 0. Okay, so these 2 variables, they are initialized. And back to the player now, once that we have this initialize variables script here in place, we're going to the step event and we're going to make the logic to make the player point towards the mouse. We're going to do this in the following video. To make the player point towards the mouse, we need another code block. So let's drag this execute code action here. Let's type make player point towards the mouse, so it looks like this, and we have to make a verification here. Now imagine we have our screen here and we have our player pointing to the right, for example. So imagine first our mouse is in this position. Now imagine we move our mouse to this position. We need to calculate that direction here, that arrow that points to the original place to the next place. Okay, so to do that, we're going to use point underscore direction function. Okay, now notice that when we used x and y, these were colored red because these are variables. Now when we use point underscore direction, we're calling a function, so it's colored in orange, a bit yellowish. And functions, they have a signature, so you can see here point underscore direction, and between parentheses you have a sequence of arguments. You have x1, y1, x2, and y2. So these are the coordinates of the 2 points that we're going to use to verify the direction. So here we're going to open parentheses. Let's delete that. We open parentheses in that function call, and first we're going to use previous underscore mouse underscore x, and then previous underscore mouse underscore y for the original position. And the other position that we're going to use is mouse underscore x and mouse underscore y. Okay, so functions, they are a sequence of operations. Okay, they're going to run calculations or do something else that is going to impact how your game works. In that case, point underscore direction is going to return a number. Okay, that is going to be the direction between these 2 points. So that number we're going to store somewhere, and we're going to store in a variable that GameMaker provides us. We're going to store in direction. Okay, so we're going to use direction equals to, and then point underscore direction and the original coordinates and the final coordinates. And direction is a variable of the player that changes the direction of the player. But note that direction is a thing that works internally. We're not going to see the sprite rotate when we use direction. So we have to use image underscore angle. Okay, and I'm going to assign it to direction as well. Okay, so both things are looking like that. Okay, and after we do this, it is very important that we set previous mouse x and previous mouse y, because after we used x and y for these calculations, then we should be done with the previous mouse x and previous mouse y. We now store the new values on the previous ones, so they can be used in the next call. So we're going to type here previous underscore mouse underscore x equals to mouse underscore x, and finally previous underscore mouse underscore y equals to mouse underscore y. Okay, so this should work. However, since we're going we can make very short movements with the mouse, it might seem that the player is rotating too fast. So we can make a logic here. We can tell the code that we want this to be done when the mouse position is 10 pixels far away from the previous mouse. Okay, so it doesn't rotate a lot. Okay, to do this, we're going to use an if block. So type if, you open and close parentheses, and enclose the rest of the code in curly braces. So it's going to look like this. We have if, then we have these curly braces, and we have the instructions that we wrote here. So what is an if block? An if block is a block where you type a question. Okay, we're going to ask a question to the code, and if that question is true, okay, it's going to run whatever is in here. So that question can be something like 3 is greater than 1, for example. 3 is greater than 1, so this is true. And since this is true, this is going to run. However, if you come here and say that apples, they equal, so 2 equal signs, to oranges, this is going to be false, and this code is not going to run. So what we're going to do here is we're going to check the distance between these 2 points. We're going to use the point underscore distance function. And between parentheses, we're going to pass the same arguments we used in point direction. So we're going to use previous underscore mouse underscore x, previous underscore mouse underscore y, and finally mouse underscore x and mouse underscore y. So we need to check if that distance is greater than 10 pixels. Okay, so let's review that. We check if we are far enough from the previous position. If we are, we're going to set the direction variable in the image angle, so the image rotates as well, and we're going to set previous mouse x and previous mouse y to be the new mouse x and mouse y. So let's give this a try. We're going to click on this green arrow here to run the game. Wait for the project to be saved, for the code to be compiled, and the window to open. After it is, we have our player here, and when we move our mouse, then the player smoothly follows our mouse position. Okay, so this works very well. Now that we can move our player, we should be ready to make some objects here, to make some objects appear and be able to collect them. We're going to see this in the next video. Before we add any objects to the room, we need to make sprites for them. So we're going to the sprites folder. We're going to right click here and select create sprite. The name of this sprite is going to be spr underscore, and let's call this collectible. Okay, so this is something that we can collect in the game. To make a sprite, we're going to click on edit sprite, then create a new sprite. The size would be 32 by 32. This should be fine. We're going to hit OK. Let's double click this image, this empty image, and now we're going to make a very simple gem here. So I'm going to pick the polygon tool. I'm going to choose white as the outline. Okay, let me choose this one. Yes, and for the fill color, we're going to use yellow, and make sure you have outline and fill selected. So to make this diamond, I'm going to draw it like this. Okay, so we have some shapes here. It looks like that polygon. Okay, so this should work well. Actually, it's a bit strange, so let me fix this better. I'm going to make it work like a hexagon. This should be easier. Okay, so it looks like this. If you want, you can add some details here to the side. So it looks like this. Okay, so you draw it as you want. We're going to click here to save this sprite. We're going to click here again, so we have the collectible sprite. And now let's click center to make sure we have an arrow in the middle, so the origin is in the middle of this object. And here in objects, we're going to right click, select create object, and this is going to be obj underscore collectible. Okay, and as for the sprite, we need to click here and select spr underscore collectible. So we have the collectible object. Now, as a test, we're going to add some collectibles here. We're going to add some of these things that we can collect in the room. We're going to click on objects, and we're going to select where it says object to add with left mouse. We're going to click here and select obj underscore collectible, and we can just click around to add some instances that we can later collect. So right now let's click on run the game to see how this is going to look like. So we should have our player in the middle, which is our green arrow, and we have some gems to collect. And all that we need to do is to move the mouse to get these gems. Okay, as soon as we touch these gems, then they should disappear and other ones should appear. So what we need to do is we need to check for collisions. Whenever you see objects in your game, there is one important concept you have to understand. This is not an object. This is an instance of an object. Because an object is like a prefab. It's a model that you use to add instances of that model in your room, in your game. Okay? And these instances, okay, the sprites of these instances contain a mask. And a mask is like a square that surrounds this object this instance that you added to the room, and this is what is going to be used for calculating the collision. So right now, the player and this gem here are not colliding. In order for them to collide, these boxes here, they would have to overlap each other. So imagine another scenario where we have our player here. So the collision boxes would be something like that, and you notice that there's an area here that a collision happened, and that means that they overlap each other, and then we can collect that gem. Okay, so how we're going to work on this logic? Okay, let's go to our player object. We're going to click on add event, and here we're going to add the collision event. Notice that a little pop-up opens here where we have to select either a player or a collectible. So this happens because collisions always happen on a one-by-one basis. You only check collisions between instances of players and other players, or players with other collectible objects. So we're going to pick a collectible here, and we're going to add a piece of code to work on this logic. Okay, let's drag it here. And what we have to type here is we have to access the other object, and once we access that other object, we're going to destroy it. It is important to understand that there are two keywords that are essential to understand how this works. We have self, the self keyword, and we also have a other keyword. So self refers to the object which is running this script. So since we're making a script in the player, since we're making a code block in the player, self is going to reference the player, and other is going to reference the object which we collided with, which should be an instance of a collectible object. Okay, and also there is a function that we call for destroying instances, and that function is called instance underscore destroy, and it receives no arguments whatsoever. Okay, so we just open and close parentheses to run it. And this function here, you can call it by typing, for example, other.instance destroy, or you can't use instance underscore destroy and pass other as a parameter. So there's a trick you have to use to be able to change your code scope to work on the other object. So what we're going to do here is type with, and between parentheses we add other, and then we open and close curly braces. When we do this, we're going to change the scope. So whatever we see here, whatever we write here, is going to consider that we are processing all these instructions in the collectible object, so in the other object. So now what we have to do is we have to move that instance underscore destroy function call to be inside this with block. Okay, and this should be enough to destroy the collectible objects. Now we're going to click on run the game for our project to be saved. We wait for the code to compile, and after our game runs, we are able to move our player and touch all the gems which are in the game and essentially clear the scenario. Okay, so there are two things left in this game. First of all, we only have one type of gem. It's just that yellow gem. What if you want to have two others? What if you want to have a pink one and a red one, for example? So it looks a bit more, we add a little bit more variety to this game. And also we want to add some sort of infinite game. Okay, so we want to have we always want to have 10 different collectible objects in the game, in the screen. So when we collect one, another one is added in a random position. We're going to learn that later. So first of all, let's work on making different gems for our collectibles. We're going to do this in the next lesson.